It was shortly after he had returned to Washington that the aliens gave the waiting world the reasons for their appearance on Earth. They were, they said, members of a very ancient, highly evolved culture called Aztlan. And the Aztlans, long past the need for conquest and expansion, had turned their mighty science to the help of other, less fortunate races in the galaxy. The aliens were, in a sense, missionaries, one of hundreds of teams traveling the star lanes to bring the benefits of Aztlan culture to less favored worlds. They were, very unblushingly admitted, altruists, interested only in helping others. It was pure corn, Matson reflected cynically, but the world lapped it up and howled for more. After decades of Cold War, lukewarm war, and sporadic outbreaks of violence that were inevitably building to atomic destruction, men were willing to try anything that would ease the continual burden of strain and worry. To mankind, the Aztlan's words were as refreshing as a cool breeze of hope in a desert of despair. And the world got what it wanted. Quite suddenly, the aliens left the Northwest, and accompanied by protective squads of FBI and Secret Service began to cross the nation. Taking widely separated paths, they visited cities, towns, and farms, exhibiting the greatest curiosity about the workings of human civilization. And in turn, they were examined by hordes of hopeful humans. Everywhere they went, they spread their message of goodwill and hope, backed by the incredibly convincing power of their telepathic minds. Behind them, they left peace and hopeful calm. Before them, anticipation mounted. It rose to a crescendo in New York, where the paths of the starmen met. The Aztlans invaded the United Nations. They spoke to the General Assembly and the Security Council, were interviewed by the Secretariat and reporters from 100 foreign lands. They told their story with such conviction that even the Communist bloc failed to raise an objection, which was as amazing to the majority of the delegates as the fact of the starmen themselves. Altruism, it seemed, had no conflict with dialectic materialism. The aliens offered a watered-down variety of their technology to the peoples of Earth with no strings attached, and the governments of Earth accepted with open hands, much as a small boy accepts a cookie from his mother. It was impossible for men to resist the lure of something for nothing, particularly when it was offered by such people as the Aztlans. After all, Matson reflected bitterly, nobody shoots Santa Claus. From every nation in the world came invitations to the aliens to visit their lands. The starmen cheerfully accepted. They moved across Europe, Asia, and Africa, visited South America, Central America, the Middle East, and Oceania. No country escaped them. They absorbed languages, learned customs, and spread goodwill. Everywhere they went, relaxation followed in their footsteps, and throughout the world arose a realization of the essential brotherhood of man. It took nearly 3 years of continual traveling before the aliens again assembled at UN headquarters to begin the second part of their promised plan, to give their science to Earth. And men waited with calm expressions for the dawn of Golden Age. Matson's lips twisted. Fools! Blind, stupid fools, selling their birthright for a mess of pottage. He shifted the rifle across his knees and began filling the magazine with cartridges. He felt an empty loneliness as he closed the action over the filled magazine and turned the safety to on. There was no comforting knowledge of support or sympathy to sustain him in what he was about to do. There was no real hope that there ever would be. His was a voice crying in the wilderness, a voice that was ignored, as it had been when he visited the President of the United States. Matson entered the White House, presented his appointment card, and was ushered past ice-eyed Secret Service men into the presidential office. It was as close as he had ever been to the chief executive, and he stared with polite curiosity across the width of the desk which separated them. "I wanted to see you about the Aztlan business," the president began without preamble. "You were there when their ship landed, and you are also one of the few men in the country who has seen them alone. In addition, your office will probably be handling the bulk of our requests in regard to the offer they made yesterday in the UN. You're in a favorable spot." The president smiled and shrugged. "I wanted to talk with you sooner, but business and routine play the devil with one's desires in this office. Now tell me," he continued, "your impression of these people." "They're an enigma," Matson said flatly. "To tell you the truth, I can't figure them out." He ran his fingers through his hair with a worried gesture. I'm supposed to be a pretty fair physicist, and I've had quite a bit of training in the social sciences, but both the mechanisms and psychology of those Astlans were beyond my comprehension. All I can say for sure is that they're as far beyond us as we are beyond the cavemen. In fact, we have so little in common that I can't think of a single reason why they would want to stay here, and the fact that they do only adds to my confusion. But you must have learned something, the president said. Oh, we've managed to collect data, Matson replied, but there's a lot of difference between data and knowledge. I can appreciate that, but I'd still like to know what you think. Your opinion could have some weight. Matson doubted it. His opinions were contrary to those of the majority. Still, the chief asked for it, and he might possibly have an open mind. It was a chance worth taking. Well, sir, I suppose you've heard of the so-called wild talents some of our own people occasionally possess? The president nodded. It is my belief, Matson continued, that the Astlans possess these to a far greater degree than we do, and that their science is based upon them. They have something which they call psychomathematics, which by definition is the mathematics of the mind, and this seems to be the basis of their physical science. I saw their machines. I must confess that their purpose baffled me until I realized that they must be mechanisms for amplifying their own natural equipment. We know little or nothing about psi phenomena, so it is no wonder I couldn't figure them out. As a matter of fact, we've always treated psi as something that shouldn't be mentioned in polite scientific conversation. The president grinned. I always thought you boys had your blind spots. We do, but when you're confronted with a fact, we try to find out something about it. That is, if the fact hits us hard enough, often enough. Well, you've been hit hard and often, the president chuckled. What did you find out? Facts, Matson said grimly. Just facts. Things that could be determined by observation and measurement. We know that the aliens are telepathic. We also know that they have a form of ESP, or perhaps a recognition of danger would be a better term. And we know its range is somewhat over a third of a mile. We know that they're telekinetic. The lack of visible controls in their ship would tell us that. Even if we hadn't seen them move small objects at a distance, we know that they have eidetic memories, and that they can reason on an extremely high level. Other than that, we know nothing. We don't even know their physical structure. We've tried X-ray, but they're radio opaque. We tried using some human sensitivities from the Rhine Institute, but they're unable to get anywhere. They just turn empathic in the aliens' presence, and when we get them back, they do nothing but babble about the beauty of the Astlan soul. Considering the difficulties, you haven't done too badly, the president said. I take it then that you're convinced that they are an advanced life form, but do you think they're sincere in their attitude towards us? Oh, they're sincere enough, Matson said. The only trouble is that we don't know just what they're sincere about. You see, sir, we are in the position of a savage to whom a trader brings the luxuries of civilization. To the savage, the trader may represent purest altruism, giving away such valuable things as glass beads and machine-made cloth for useless pieces of yellow rock and the skin of some native pest. The savage hasn't the slightest inkling that he's being exploited. By the time he realizes he's been had, the yellow rock is gold and the skins are mink. He has become so dependent on the goods for which the trader has whetted his appetite that he inevitably becomes an economic slave. Of course, you can argue that the cloth and beads are far more valuable to the savage than the gold or mink, but in the last analysis, value is determined by the higher culture, and by that standard the savage gets taken, and ultimately civilization moves in, and the superior culture of the trader race determines how the savage will act. And ultimately, civilization moves in, and the superior culture of the trader's race determines how the savage will act. Still, the savage has a basis for his acts. He is giving something for something, making a trade, but we're not even in that position. The aliens apparently want nothing from us. They have asked for nothing except our goodwill, and that isn't a tradable item. But they're altruists, the president protested. Sir, do you think that they're insane? Matson asked curiously. Do they appear like fanatics to you? But we can't apply our human standards to them. You yourself have said that their civilization is more advanced than ours. Whose standards can we apply? Matson asked. If not ours, then whose? The only standards that we can possibly apply are our own. And in the entire history of human experience, there has never been a single culture that has had a basis of pure altruism. Such a culture could not possibly exist. It would be overrun and gobbled up by its practical neighbors before it drew its first breath. We must assume that the culture from which these aliens come has had a practical basis in its evolutionary history. It could not have risen full-blown and altruistic like Minerva from the brain of Jove, and if the culture had a practical basis in the past, it logically follows that it has a practical basis in the present. Such a survival trait as practicality would probably never be lost, no matter how far the Aztlan race has evolved. Therefore, we must concede that they are practical people, people who do not give away something for nothing. But the question still remains, what do they want? Whatever it is, I don't think it's anything from which we will profit, no matter how good it looks. I am convinced that cooperation with these aliens will not ultimately be to our advantage. Despite the reports of every investigative agency in this government, I cannot believe that any such thing as pure altruism exists in a sane mind. And whatever I may believe about the Aztlans, I do not think they're insane. The president sighed. You are a suspicious man, Matson, and perhaps you are right. But it doesn't matter what you believe, or what I believe for that matter. This government has decided to accept the help of the Aztlans are so graciously offering, and until the reverse is proven, we must accept the fact that the Starmen are altruists, and work with them on that basis. You will organize your office along these lines and extract every gram of information that you can. Even you must admit that they have knowledge that will improve our American way of life. Matson shook his head doggedly. I'm afraid, sir, if you expect Aztlan science to improve the American way of life, you are going to be disappointed. It might promote an Aztlan way of life, but the reverse is hardly possible. It's not my decision, the president said. My hands are tied. Congress voted for the deal by acclamation early this morning. I couldn't veto it even if I wanted to. I cannot cooperate in what I believe is our destruction, Matson said in a flat voice. Then you have only one course, the president said. I will be forced to accept your resignation. He sighed wearily. Personally, I think you're making a mistake. Think it over before you decide. You're a good man, and Lord knows the government can use good men. There are far too many fools in politics. He shrugged and stood up. The interview was over. Matson returned to his offices filled with cold frustration. Even the president believed he could do nothing, and these short-sighted politicians, who could see nothing more than the immediate gains, there was a special hell reserved for them. There were too many fools in politics. However, he would do what he could. His sense of duty was stronger than his resentment. He would stay on and try to cushion some of the damage which the Aztlans would inevitably cause, no matter how innocent their motives, and perhaps the president was right. Perhaps the alien science would bring more harm than good. And perhaps the president was right. Perhaps the alien science would bring more good than harm.